The US and UK carried out their second major wave of strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. 83 American service members have so far been wounded by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria just in the last few months. And Israel suffers their deadliest day since ground forces moved into Gaza. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to this broader war that has spread across the Middle East. I'm recording this at 9 a.m. Central on Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024. Overnight, U.S. Central Command said that U.S. and U.K. forces, with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, and the Netherlands, conducted strikes on 8 Houthi targets across Yemen. They say the targets included missile systems and launchers, air defense systems, radars, and deeply buried weapons storage facilities. This is the 8th strike carried out by the United States against Houthi targets and is the second joint operation conducted with the United Kingdom after that first wave of attacks was carried out back on January 11th. Then, in an article by the BBC, they said that Western intelligence officials recently estimated that at least 30% of Houthi missile stocks have been destroyed or degraded. I'd be cautious with that number. That would be an incredibly effective series of strikes that the U.S. has so far carried out. The Houthis are used to this. We just put out a free article on Substack. If interested, I'll link it in the description below, that talks about the Houthi capabilities, their background, what they've dealt with in fighting the Saudis over the past few years. It would be very surprising if it just takes a couple series of strikes by the U.S. and UK to knock out 1/3 of the overall Houthi missile capability. Maybe, but I'd be a little bit skeptical of that. Now, we did get news yesterday that the United States has named this ongoing operation to target Houthi assets in Yemen, quote, Operation Poseidon Archer. So Poseidon Archer is separate from Prosperity Guardian. Prosperity Guardian is a defensive coalition of nations who've committed naval assets and personnel to kind of bolstering security in the Red Sea. So to kind of split this out a little bit, and there's going to be some overlap, so be ready. But Prosperity Guardian are the naval assets that are shooting down drones and missiles that are targeting either naval vessels or commercial ships in the Red Sea, and then providing assistance when those ships are either struck or if they call in and say, hey, we got some Houthis on a boat coming out here trying to board. You know, it's Prosperity Guardian that would send those assets there to assist and kind of help save those commercial vessels. Poseidon Archer is what we saw overnight. The joint U.S. and U.K. strikes, deliberate strikes against Houthi military infrastructure. What's not clear is those 6 other strikes that the U.S. has carried out over the course of the past couple weeks. The U.S. has generally referred to those as preemptive. They're using that term as in they see the Houthis lining up to conduct a drone or missile attack, and the U.S. preemptively strikes that target. I don't know necessarily if they're going to line that up under Poseidon Archer because it's a attack, or if it's under Prosperity Guardian because it is kind of defensive in nature, just preemptive. But either way, we've now got the 2 operations, Poseidon Archer and Prosperity Guardian. Now, looking at the Houthi attacks, they have slowed a little bit over the course of the past couple weeks. They haven't stopped. If you remember, there was a major complex attack against U.S. forces, like 21 drones and missiles, just before kind of the first U.S.-UK joint attack. We haven't seen anything like that. Again, one of the challenges here is that for the Houthis to continue to disrupt shipping in the Red Sea, it just takes one drone attack every couple days. They don't even have to hit anything. Now, yesterday, the Houthis put out a statement saying, with the help of God Almighty, the naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces, again, the Houthis refer to everything they do as Yemen. There is another government in Yemen, the Republic of Yemen. But they say they carried out a military operation targeting an American military cargo ship, the Ocean Jazz, in the Gulf of Aden using appropriate naval missiles. And then the U.S. Fifth Fleet took to Twitter to say, nope. They put out a statement saying the Iranian-backed Houthi terrorists' report of alleged successful attack on the MV Ocean Jazz is patently false. NAVCENT has maintained constant communications with MV Ocean Jazz throughout its safe transit. We haven't seen a lot of this quite yet. So the Houthis have been very vocal in claiming everything they do. They're getting a lot of press, a lot of attention in a lot of ways for what they've been doing over the last few months. The only time that I can remember that there was a discrepancy in what happened versus what was announced is when a ship carrying Russian fuel was hit, apparently accidentally. The Houthis didn't announce that. They didn't say anything about that strike taking place. This is the first one that I can remember where the Houthis said that something was hit And the ship in question, or the entity monitoring that ship, said, we have no idea what you're talking about. In past occurrences, that you'll hear the Houthis say, like, we struck this ship, and the response will be, you missed. But that attack did occur. This one's just completely off a little bit. So interesting, kind of notable there. All right, so we'll try to lighten things up here a little bit. All this content is so dark and gloomy and pessimistic. Try to get some of this stuff in from time to time. So the National Resistance Front is an organization in Afghanistan fighting back against the Taliban. And yesterday, a page associated with them on Twitter published this picture saying that it was an image of the Taliban abducting 2 innocent women. Look how bad the Taliban are. Here's a picture of them abducting women. Took some in-depth detective work, but fortunately, the wonders of the internet, somebody out there went, actually, no, I've seen that picture before. And determined that it was actually a screenshot from a porn series titled Tour of Booty, which is, I mean, just like perfect across the board. So we, the United States, are walking this tightrope in the Middle East right now, and I feel like people don't understand just how precarious of a situation this is. According to Carla Babb, the Pentagon correspondent for Voice of America, since mid-October, there have been at least 83 Americans wounded in Iranian-backed proxy attacks against U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq and Syria. That's a lot. And how fortunate that none of them have been killed. And it sounds like most of them are relatively minor injuries, because she says all but 2 have returned to duty. That's good. That's positive. That's playing with fire, man. Like, what is the response if Americans start dying in Iraq and Syria? I don't know. The pessimistic side of me says that that people just don't really pay that much attention to it at all. It'll say, well, it's the nature of the beast. It's just kind of being in the military. But I wouldn't write that off so easily, right? We've been very fortunate at this point in this conflict to not there were 2 Navy SEALs that were lost. Their names and pictures were released just yesterday, kind of during the overall course of these operations. They were boarding a ship off the coast of Somalia. But we haven't had any U.S. personnel killed in this war so far at the hands of, adversarial actors. What happens if that changes? Because any one of these attacks could change that calculus. I don't know. It's one of those things where you feel like you start to lose control of the options at hand, if that makes sense. Like, you can be very deliberate, but the minute that people start dying, the minute shots start being fired, you start to lose a little bit of control of where you can kind of move this thing going forward. In light of that, the Islamic resistance in Iraq, which is a loose umbrella of Iranian-backed militias across Iraq and Syria, claimed responsibility for 4 attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria yesterday, which 4 doesn't sound like a lot. It is a bit of an uptick. Over the last few weeks, really what we've seen is 1 to 2 every couple days. So for 4 in one day to be claimed is notable. Again, we don't have a ton of forces in Iraq and Syria, but those that are there right now have been under near constant bombardment now for going on 3 months. Then turning to operations on the ground, Israel says that 21 soldiers were killed yesterday in southern Gaza near Khan Yunis. Still seems like some mixed information coming out at this point. What I've been able to gather so far is that there was an explosion with these soldiers were inside of a building. The building was either rigged with explosives, which we've seen before all across Gaza, nothing new there, or it was hit with enough RPGs, mortars, rockets that it collapsed in on itself, while at least 21 soldiers were inside it. It sounds like there were a fair number also wounded that fortunately were not killed in this attack. And then Hamas did put out a statement, which I believe is related to this attack, saying at exactly 1600 yesterday evening, the Al-Qassam Mujahideen were able to carry out a combined operation where they targeted a house in which a Zionist engineering force was holed up with an anti-personnel missile, which led to the explosion of the ammunition and engineering equipment in its possession and completely blew up the house on top of it. And simultaneously, the Mujahideen destroyed it. So the Hamas statement here suggests that this was an engineering force, and they had all of their C4 and explosives inside of this home staged there to be used all across Gaza. And the Hamas attack detonated that ammunition storage facility essentially, and brought the entire house down on top of the Israeli soldiers. Then Hamas claimed responsibility for 18 attacks over the course of the past 2 days all across Gaza, and they released a video that I'll play here in a second showing fighting in Jabalia, which is notable because that is in the northern portion of the Gaza Strip, where the IDF has been operating for quite a while now. And I think it just kind of reinforces that so many of these tunnel networks are still intact, and Hamas is still able to infiltrate behind what could be considered the front lines, which is not a term that should be used in this war at all. You look at some of these maps, it kind of suggests that maybe there's a front, but just given the nature of the underground fight and an insurgency type war, front lines, line of contact, it's really, really messy. So what we're seeing here in Jabalia, the fighting continues. So there's a couple things I wanted to point out in this video. The first is the continued use of these tandem charge RPG warheads against Israeli forces at relatively close range. Not really a surprise. Hamas has been using these in a lot of attacks for a long time now. It's kind of their favorite RPG, if you will. But I thought it was worth pointing out some of the Hamas tactics that we're seeing here and what that could mean going forward. So you'll see the militants here using whatever they can for cover and concealment. Cover being anything that protects you from enemy fire, concealment being anything that protects you from enemy observation. In an urban environment, cover and concealment is most of the time buildings, right? Shouldn't be a shock. That's what's there. That's what you're going to use, and that's what Hamas is using and has been using for a long time now. So the challenge that Israel faces when going up against this is, as you can see this video, RPGs pointing out of windows, IEDs going off in the doorways, small arms fire coming from the alleyways. At what point does Israel look at that building and say, enough, just eliminate the building, just drop the whole thing, turn it into rubble, eliminate those windows as possibilities for Hamas to fire at us from? And then you can see, what about the next house? What about the next block? What about you move one village over and you see a couple buildings that could be used as firing ports for Hamas? You just take them out right away to prevent Hamas from using them. You can see how quickly this spirals into a situation where all of Gaza is just complete rubble. And we've seen that play out throughout history. It's nothing new. It wouldn't be unique for it to happen here. But I think these clips here showing how Hamas is fighting gives you an idea of how quickly you can get from what we're seeing today to just complete rubble all across the Gaza Strip. All right, so there's a little bit of news yesterday on a potential ceasefire and hostage release, but the bigger story is that it was all rejected. I thought it was at least worth running through what some of those terms were so you can at least get an idea of what the two sides are talking about. So Netanyahu put out, quote, "In exchange for the release of our hostages, Hamas demands the end of the war, the withdrawal of our forces from Gaza, the release of all the murderers and rapists, and leaving Hamas intact. I reject outright the terms of surrender of the monsters of Hamas." A couple notes there for clarification. That was interesting that Netanyahu referred to that proposal as Israel surrendering to Hamas, just how he's framing it. The withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza seems like a poison pill. Like, that's not going to get through. It's hard to, there's not really much of a call that I've seen anywhere within Israel or the United States or Israeli allies for Israel to, like, right now, game's up, get out of there. So that seems like it was dead on arrival. Where Netanyahu says here, the release of all murderers and rapists, what I saw from a previous report was that Hamas was asking for the release of all Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli custody. So it looks like in this case, Netanyahu is referring to that group, all Palestinians held in captivity, as murderers and rapists. There was also news that Israel pushed forward a proposal through Qatar and Egypt to Hamas that would include a 2-month of a pause in the fighting as part of a multi-phase deal that would include the release of all remaining hostages held in Gaza. I haven't heard a response to this one yet, but that also kind of seems dead on arrival. It's hard to, maybe, I guess I should say that. Got to remain optimistic for anything that stops the fighting, right? It seems like the big bargaining chip that Hamas has right now are the hostages. It seems unlikely that in one deal for one thing that they would give that up if the only thing they achieve is a pause in the fighting. But hey, it's something. There seems like there's still progress. There's still people working every single day to try to get those hostages home and to try to secure some sort of ceasefire in Gaza. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out my Substack in the description below. We're covering this and other subjects in more depth and detail, providing some expert analysis on things that I think you'll really be interested in. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.